Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by AT&T.
Every one of us, in our own ways, through our own trials, is making our way through a season. And in its great wins and hard moments and sudden losses,
He missed it! Hit the upright!
there's an answer we all seek to know and all want to find.
Touchdown, Jalen Hurts!
What's our place? Where do we stand? Much goes into that accounting. And now starts the reckoning. The strength of a schedule, the power of a conference, the quality of a victory, the proof of our results. We work, we wait to earn and learn the answer.
Absolute dominant performance from J.K. Dobbins.
Where do we rank? Are we in?
The penultimate rankings just a few minutes away. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee meeting and putting together this rankings ahead of Championship Saturday. And, of course, the final rankings come up on Sunday. The committee will be all together to watch games, evaluate, vote, and come up with a final determination. That's Sunday. Got rankings coming your way in only a half hour to get to them. Rece Davis, Jesse Palmer, Joey Galloway, and David Pollack. Kirk Herbstreit is joining us from Nashville. Hope you get a chance to see Kirk's conversation with Tua Tagovailoa a little bit later on SportsCenter tonight as well. So we've got one more week to play, so the college football playoff storylines is set up. Let's get things started. Joey, at least one team gets eliminated from all of this, and David, the teams at the top continued to roll.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about the top four. Not at all. Nobody's going to be surprised. Everybody took care of business. Ohio State convincingly, obviously, took care of business. So you're going to see a lot of that, a lot of Joe Burrow. We've seen this all season long. We've seen them go back and forth a little bit. Clemson's been in that three-hole. So if we're projecting this forward, I think it's going to look a lot similar than it did last week.
And then, of course, Minnesota, or this is Joey. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Iron Bowl, baby. Iron Bowl. How about Auburn going at home against Alabama? The missed field goal late. Very sloppy game for Alabama and Nick Saban. Their playoff hopes die on the road at Jordan-Hare.
Big question about could the Big Ten get two teams into this playoff, and Minnesota had their chance. They lost to a Wisconsin team. Now they back out of it, opening the door for a conversation that is the Pac-12 and Big 12. Which one of those conferences can take over the fourth spot?
Everybody talked about the Pac-12 early in the year and whether or not they were in or out. Utah has been making a strong statement. In fact, since the USC lost their first conference game, the last 8 games, they have a scoring margin of 29 points per game. That's better than even LSU in that span.
And they're going to be compared, if they beat Oregon, to the Big 12 champion. Oklahoma and Baylor will meet for the second time. The Big Sooner rally, the first time those two met, set up the championship game and perhaps the final statement for the Big 12 champion as they try to get into the college football playoff. The one thing the Big 12 knows that the Pac-12 can't say is they know they're going to have a one-loss champion come Selection Sunday. All right, let's have a look now at the top 25. Remember, we haven't seen it yet. We see it when you do this week's college football playoff rankings, brought to you by AT&T. Oklahoma State hangs in, so that's another win over a ranked opponent for the Big 12 contenders, and an ACC team is ranked in Virginia.
Interesting to me. I expected to see Cincinnati in this range. I'm wondering if they stayed in the top 20, even though they lost to Memphis, and them staying in the top 20 helps out Ohio State. Also, you talked about that group of 5 team. Cincinnati's still in the mix.
Oh, yeah. Just waiting for it. It's coming.
USC 22. Utah, of course, lost to USC. Appalachian State at 21. Let's look now at the next group of teams, 16 through 20. Cincinnati is behind Boise State. Both those teams fighting for a New Year's 6. So, too, is Memphis, the highest-ranked team from the group of 5.
And obviously, Memphis took care of Cincinnati this past week. They're going to be above them. But Cincinnati has an opportunity against them to rise back up and possibly be over Boise State. So, group of 5. There it is, right there for you. There's your picture.
And look at the plummet from Minnesota, dropping 10 spots all the way down to 18 and behind the team that they lost to Iowa before losing to Wisconsin on Saturday. Let's look at 11 through 15 now. Notre Dame, Michigan just falls 1 spot. Oregon's up. Alabama falls all the way behind Auburn.
And it's critical to take a look at where Oregon is, and that's important for Utah. Utah currently right now with no wins against any teams in the top 25. That would be the one. That's a big resume builder for them coming up in the Pac-12 title game against their comparison against Oklahoma and Baylor.
Also, I mean, we're looking at playoff right now. If you start thinking about New Year's Six bowls and the other bowls, the fact that Auburn's ahead of Alabama potentially could impact the pecking order and what bowls select and choose to do once the New Year's Six bowls and the other affiliated bowls start making their choices. So Auburn at 11 after beating Alabama, knocking the Tide from contention. Let's look at number 10, Penn State, 10-2, and the Nittany Lions, very hopeful about winding up in the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day. What about number 9, just ahead of the Nittany Lions, the Florida Gators? Gators also sitting there with a terrific 10-2 record. Their only loss is coming to teams we think we're going to see in the top 4.
These are two teams that could be in consideration for an Orange Bowl and a New Year's Six Orange Bowl as well. In that game, ACC opponent versus the highest-ranked SEC, Big Ten, or Notre Dame. So a little flip-flopping there after Florida beats Florida State.
Just ahead of the Gators, who are up 2 spots this week, Wisconsin. Wisconsin up 4 spots as they get ready to play in the Big Ten championship game. Kirk, not really a playoff contender, but Wisconsin sitting there in the mix right now and could finish off with a Big Ten championship and potentially a trip to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, obviously they beat Ohio State to go to the Rose Bowl. Interesting thing there, Rece, is if the Buckeyes win, Wisconsin and Penn State, there'll be an interesting discussion there that we'll have maybe later tonight or on Saturday about who has the edge to be the team to represent the Big Ten out in Pasadena.
So Wisconsin up 4 spots to 8. Let's see who's at number 7. It is Baylor. So you're going to have a setup in the Big 12 championship game, a couple of teams in the top 7.
And even though Utah's been ranked ahead of Oklahoma all this time, now they're going to have a chance to add a number 7 Baylor onto their resume. And this is going to be thin and a good conversation to be had. Whose resume at the end looks better? If Baylor's sitting at 7, we assume that Oklahoma's going to be at 6 and Utah at 5.
And Baylor lost. Keep in mind, we're going to see Oklahoma in a second. Baylor lost to Oklahoma when they were up 25 points and had the game in hand. I mean, the committee talks about all this. They're going to bring all of this into account. If they avenge their only loss, Baylor's in a really good
And it's been an amazing 2 weeks for Baylor. Remember 2 weeks ago, they were number 14. We've been calling this Big 12 market correction that we saw last week when they moved up 5 spots. Then all of a sudden, Oregon loses and Minnesota loses and Alabama loses. And now you've got a top 7 meetup in the Big 12 title game. And as you mentioned, David, if they avenge that loss against Oklahoma, if they play in that game the entirety, the way they played the first half when they had a 25-point lead, could that be enough to maybe convince the committee to leapfrog Utah if LSU beats Georgia?
Kirk, I always say you have to be cautious here because you're dealing with a small group of people. The committee's only 13 people, a number of 13 people, and that's not even counting when guys are recused from making the discussions. But do you derive anything from what you've seen so far and how it could impact Utah in the Pac-12 championship game if the Utes win against the Big 12 champion?
Well, I think it's always important to remember, as much as conference championships are important, the entire body of work is more important. Week 1 to week 12 and then into the extra week that you have to play. And it's an interesting discussion that the committee's going to have with Utah and Oklahoma. Everything has shown us up to this point, and we'll see here in a few minutes, that they favor Utah over Oklahoma. Will that, as guys just said, will playing number 7 for number 6 OU give them an advantage, enough of an advantage over what the committee has felt that Utah should be ahead of them? Be interesting to see, I think, the style of their last game as well in a closing argument.
All right, we can touch on that, too, as to whether it should matter that much. But let's look at the top 6 right now. At number 1, Ohio State hold its place.
I
was like,
it was about to get weird.
Awesome. I thought we were starting at 6. Are we counting down from 6 now?
Okay, get 6.
Okay, yes. We're going to count down from 6 now. That is not.
God, that would have been awesome.
You know, you got it all. Check. Omaha. Utah is number 5, 1 spot ahead of Oklahoma. Both of those teams will play in their respective conference championship games. Let's continue looking at the rankings. Team in the top 4. Georgia is number 4. Dogs holding that. They'll get a shot at LSU. At number 3, I assume we're going to see Clemson again. And we do. But you know what? Clemson better beat Virginia in that ACC championship game, or there is no chance they go to the playoff because nobody respects them or believes they're good.
I think Clemson would be in it if they lost.
And so do I. And my tongue was firmly planted in my cheek, making fun of Dabo, because I think these top 3 teams are in regardless of what happens. Absent getting vote raced by 50, which is not going to happen, top 3 are going to be in. Let's look at number 2. It's still LSU. And then number 1 is Ohio State. Now, perhaps part of the talk that Dabo Swinney's looking at now is that he's got the nation's longest winning streak, won 2 of the last 3 national champions. They're the reigning national champions, and they're going to wind up with LSU or Ohio State, presumably, while you would think that number 1 would get a bigger advantage. Alabama, it has its worst ranking in the college football playoff era. They were 6th in 2014. They eventually came back to number 1 and made the field. Utah has its best ranking for a Pac-12 team since Washington made the playoff in 2016. And the final top 4 had a change from the previous rankings in 4 of the 5 college football playoff seasons. So not really any surprises, Kirk, as you look at this. This is pretty much how we expected the top 6 or 7 to stack up.
Yeah, and like we said, I think the most intriguing thing for fans that this whole thing is confusing. The easy thing is if Georgia wins, then you're going to have the same 4 in the final rankings. It's simple as that. The numbers will rearrange a bit. If you know, Rece, you just said if the other 3 lose, more than likely they're still going to stay in it. Let's say Georgia beats LSU. The discussion will be, as we know, Utah plays on Friday night against an Oregon team. If they win that game, they sit back and watch Saturday, and they watch Oklahoma, who's been behind Utah all year long in the eyes of the committee, to see if they have enough in that opportunity against the number 7 ranked team in Baylor. And by the way, if you're Baylor, you're pulling for the Oregon Ducks, because if the Ducks win and the Baylor Bears win, Baylor sneaks in as that 4th team.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you look at it right now, if Ohio State were to lose, you walk through this, they've already beaten Wisconsin once, so you've got to split. LSU plays a team that is currently ranked 4th, and Clemson has just looked like one of the best teams, and I think they've done enough to be one of the top 4 regardless of what they do. So really, are you in agreement that we're really only talking about one spot?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I think so. I think that LSU, Ohio State, and Clemson right now are in a league of their own. And I think right now it's whether Georgia beats LSU to get in, or it's that 4th spot. To me, it's interesting, the conversation about Utah. Again, they've been ranked ahead of Oklahoma and Baylor in every college football playoff ranking without having beaten a team currently in the top 25. So to me, that says, in the eyes of the committee, they passed the eye test. They are a dominant team on both sides of the football. Defensively, they're giving up 56 rushing yards a game, best in the nation. Offensively, they run the football with Zach Moss. They've got an efficient quarterback. They've got the most impressive non-conference resume between themselves, Oklahoma, and Baylor. So it's interesting. We saw Oregon now move to number 13. Is there anything Utah couldn't do? If they just win the game, is that enough to ensure their spot getting in? Is there anything Oklahoma or Baylor could do if LSU beats Georgia and leaves that one spot open?
The advantage is with the Big 12 having a chance to sit back and watch it Friday night and see what happens. And I don't think that, and Rece, you always teach us that these could be razor thin. I don't know that it's that simple that if Utah wins, they get in because of Oregon, where they're sitting now outside the top 10. I think if Baylor or Oklahoma come out on Saturday afternoon and make a statement, and we always go back to 2014 when Ohio State played Wisconsin and made that statement. It was like, oh my gosh, this team has to get in. I think the Big 12 is sitting in that position where they can do that same thing, even though the committee has had them ranked behind Utah. I think if that Pac-12 game is close, it opens the door for the Big 12 to get in.
I think it's important that all these people for the first time are going to come together and watch the game together. They're going to watch these championship games. They're going to be able to talk about it live in living color, what's going on. So I do think whoever has an impressive day, I think it'll carry a lot of weight in the room. But one thing I think is important to note with Baylor, Baylor struggled to climb in the rankings because Baylor struggled week in and week out.
Yeah.
They flipped that switch, though. They have flipped this. They dominated Texas. They smashed Texas. They smashed this past weekend. They smashed. They had a 25-point lead against Oklahoma. I do feel like Baylor has done this and continued to climb. I feel like Oklahoma's kind of leveled out, and they've messed around with everybody they've played with. I do feel like if I'm a committee member, I'm watching Baylor. I think Baylor's getting hot, and they're playing better than Oklahoma is right now. Now they go avenge their loss. maybe they have a chance to pass Utah.
You know, a good win Saturday night, though, for Oklahoma on the road in Stillwater. But prior to that, I agree with you. TCU, Iowa State, both teams that they sort of escaped against Kirk.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is the way the two teams are trending down the finish line is very important, because remember, at the end of this whole thing, if you have a cluster, in this case we potentially have an OU-Utah cluster, you look at head-to-head, it doesn't apply. Look at common opponent. They both blew out UCLA. Are they both conference champions? Yes. Strength of schedule is the last thing. It would give OU a narrow advantage as far as strength of schedule. It could come down to the metrics, or it could come down to who is finishing last and looking the best as far as the committee looks at it and the way they're trending in the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, which would give Utah an advantage.
Yeah, you look at some of the various metrics, the strength of schedule that Kirk mentioned. Utah is one of the, I think there are 4 teams in the top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency, measuring how they've played. Utah has an advantage there, big advantage defensively over Oklahoma, but Oklahoma's much improved on defense from the past. And then Baylor lags behind a little bit on offense.
Strength of record and strength of schedule, though, Oklahoma does have the advantage.
Yes,
I
that
think
is correct.
Oklahoma also has a better loss.
Yeah,
Utah has a better loss against Oklahoma, having lost to USC and K-State.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
Both winning teams, both that they lost to, both on the road. But Utah, the caveat, they lost to a third-team quarterback, too. USC had its backup.
In the weeds.
Didn't have their best
And they didn't have Zach Moss. That's true. That is very deep in the weeds. That's why Rob Mullins comes along. We'll talk to him about some of these decisions that were made, how they're watching games this weekend in the Pac-12 and the Big 12 particularly. And coming up in just a little bit, the 21st annual Big Ten ACC Challenge. How about the job Juwan Howard is doing at Michigan? They take on Louisville. Cardinals ranked number 1. Michigan is vaulted all the way number 4. And then after that, Trey Jones, number 10, Duke, taking on Cassius Winston and Michigan State. A couple of great matchups on ESPN and the ESPN app. And there is Jordan Nwora in that 1 versus 4 matchup coming up at the bottom of the hour. An explosive offensive player. You'll be able to see it coming up.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by AT&T. This is College Football Playoff Top 25 presented by AT&T.
These are the top six teams in contention for a college football playoff spot. Baylor is just behind there at number 7. The Bears also have a case if they are able to beat Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. Utah and Oregon play in the Pac-12 title game. And LSU and Georgia in the SEC, Ohio State and Clemson in their respective title games coming up as well. Rob Mullins, who is the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, joins us now. Rob, I want to start close to the top. How much support does Clemson have for the number 1 spot in the committee room?
Well, I mean, we spend considerable time talking about those top 3, and Clemson's a great team, been very dominant. Their last 7 games extremely impressive. The difference between 1, 2, and 3 is just the wins against ranked opponents. And Ohio State with their 4th win against a ranked opponent this weekend, LSU with their impressive resume. Those are the separators from 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, so is it fair to say that at number 1, among those that are able to vote that aren't recused, that Ohio State and LSU are the only 2 getting support?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, there's plenty of conversation about Clemson. It's just their schedule is different. And so when you start to rack them up and you look at schedule strength, you see those 2 teams at 1 and 2 that have those wins against ranked opponents and highly ranked opponents.
When you look at this battle for number 4, Georgia holds a spot right now. Obviously, LSU and Georgia are going to play. What significance would you attach to the fact that Baylor's at number 7 and the opponent that Utah is going to have in the Pac-12 championship game is ranked farther down the line at 13?
Well, we spent considerable time on 4 through 7, and we understand that, where those are this week. And, we'll look to see the games this weekend. We're excited to watch the championship games just like everybody else. And there's a bunch of teams that are tightly matched in there.
From the experience that you have with this committee, and David has brought this up a couple of times, what changes when the committee's actually all together for the weekend watching the games as they unfold as a group?
Well, you're watching each and every play together, and you're talking about the games as they happen. So that leads into some of the conversation that carries into the room. You have it kind of during the game, but then you summarize it when you get into the room together.
How would you describe the difference in the voting margin that has Utah ahead of Oklahoma and Baylor right now? How wide is the gap?
I would describe I would describe it as that's the area where there was the most vigorous debate this week. We spent more times on those teams than anybody else on the board. So that right there tells you that there's a lot of conversation amongst the committee about those teams.
What was the debate about?
You're looking at Oklahoma and their win over a ranked opponent, and so you check that box there. You look at Utah and you say, boy, they have been so consistent all season long, and they've been dominant. Their defense is incredible. So those are the kind of conversations that go on in the room.
How has the respect or the consideration for Baylor evolved over the last few weeks?
Well, they played Oklahoma really tough. They followed that up with an impressive win over Texas. They put a third one together this past weekend. So there's a lot of respect for Baylor.
Rob, look forward to talking to you on College Game Day on Saturday morning and also next Sunday for Selection Day. And, I'm going to want those voting margins on Sunday, so have those ready for me, okay?
I'll see if I can unlock those.
All right, Rob Mullins. Rob, thanks a lot. Always appreciate his time as the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. The Selection Show presented by AT&T. Sunday at noon Eastern Time. We'll unveil the rankings just as soon as we get them. There's a graphics operator, I think his name is Zach, who will be the most powerful man in college football for about 10 minutes or so. Isaiah Livers, I was just having a conversation with Alfonso Ellis about the development of this guy. Big-time player, Michigan and Louisville coming up.
Top 25 is presented by AT&T and in part by Allstate, reminding you that football season is mayhem.
Let's take a look at the Chick-fil-A impact players for the college football playoff. How about those wide receivers from LSU? Justin Jefferson's caught 81 passes this year. That leads the SEC. And Jamar Chase has nearly 1,500 yards. That, too, leads the SEC. Georgia's going to have to deal with that in the SEC championship game. And as fate would have it, PlayStation Player Impact rating, Georgia safeties. Richard LeCount and J.R. Reed both have ratings in the 90s. They get set to take on Joe Burrow and those dynamic receivers from LSU. Okay, we got one more weekend of football left. Kirk, what is it, if you were in the committee room, if you were on the committee, what would be the most important thing you're looking for this weekend?
I think style points for especially Utah going into their game on Friday night and Oklahoma. They'll look at the entire year. We have a real opportunity, and when a player feels that, there's a tendency to push and press. They've got to just let the game come to them. But those two teams need to look good, obviously, not just win their games.
Yeah, I would just say style points, too, for Oklahoma. They brought their C game to the park at Baylor with 3 turnovers, no CD Lamb, still overcame a 25-point deficit. Neutral field, if they play better, could that get in?
The SEC and the Big Ten also, that #1 spot is coveted right now. Style points in those 2 conference wins will matter.
Man, poor Baylor. I mean, that Oklahoma brought their C game. They got a chance to avenge their own loss.
Poor old Baylor. Poor old Baylor.